It's 5:30. I say we call this meeting to order. At this time, I'd like any of the planning commission members to, if there's any conflict of interest or any ex parte or outside communication that might influence their ability on any of these things, to say so now. I don't think there's anything on here that would, but if so, please say so at this time. I don't see anyone from the public here who wishes to address anything that's not on the agenda.
Any public comment?
So, and at this time, we'll move on to the consent agenda from the meeting from July 12th, which is on, it's a draft and it's on the back of the page. I think action items 1, 2, or 3.
That's my effort to save paper.
We appreciate it. Motion. I'll entertain approve minutes unless you see any issues with.
Motion to approve minutes, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Motion's been seconded. Any more discussion? This time, all those in favor say of approving the minutes from July 12th, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed likewise. Moving on to the old business, the introduction of new members. Do you want to do that, Josh, or just have everyone?
Since we've combined these boards, and we were actually short 2 members before that anyways, we have a couple new members tonight. We have Carl Mills and Mary Benton. Both of them served on the Board of Zoning Appeals, so Mary has served on the Planning Commission in the past. Carl, have you served on the Planning Commission before? So, we got some mixed abilities here, just thought it would be good to have them come aboard here since they're familiar with the Board of Zoning Appeals side of things. It just seemed like a perfect fit. And apparently the City Commission agreed because they appointed them at the last meeting. So, they're now officially members of both boards.
One thing real fast before we go on to that. Gordon Fry, is he going on a different board, or
No, he is still on this board.
you just said something or an email or something, right?
Yeah,
So
it's on the.
later down, all right, we'll wait till then. This time, do you want to recap the recent actions by the planning commission and by the city?
Sure, since,
I think we all know what they were, but
yeah, I mean, I can go through them real quick. Back last August, we had a vacation request and a rezone and a conditional use request. 2 different things. The vacation was for right away at Central Avenue from 10 to 11. That was from the MARV. That's all been taken care of. The rezone and the conditional use for the body shop, that still has not been, he still is not compliant with all the regulations.
over there on Madison by Pike area.
Give him a year.
Nathan
Yeah.
Mason.
We gave him,
Probably not gonna meet the deadline.
and has he made any effort to ask for an extension or anything, or just?
It was like getting a paint booth done in that round. Yeah.
And the issue is he's not compliant with fire code, so the fire chief is gonna
I think that, yeah. So,
Makes it easier.
let you know that nothing's changed. And later on in November, we did the rezone and the conditional use for the 1125 West Skyline for storage units up there. That one too, I haven't seen anything else on there. Now, that doesn't have a deadline, so they can still develop there. They haven't yet. I have not heard anything from them in 6 months. It still hasn't happened either.
do they have a building permit or anything, or is it
Nope.
just nope?
That same month, we did the first work session where we redid some of the regulations. We did fences, accessory buildings, sign regulations. That was our big thing that we talked about for a long time. And we also redid some of the site plan review stuff. And come December, we had the city commission kicked back that conditional use because they were upset with the provision about the doorways not being able to face public right of way or residential property. So that came back, and you sent it back to them just as was again. We also had the hearing for those amendments that eventually went on to the city commission. Then in February, they had kicked back what they did was they suggested amendments to took out that provision for the doors. And so a hearing was held and that passed through. There was also another vacation for the college down at their sports complex down there. And then later on, a little more recent, in June, when we started looking at the combination of the two boards together. And then that went back and forth a little bit in July, of course, that was officially done. And August 2nd is when the city commission officially took the session. So that brings us to
Thank you. Commissioner Jennings did remind me I did not do roll call. I think we know everyone's here, but one. So, but roll call, you need to do it, Andrew. I mean, I think we know, but,
as much as you did.
so I was just going to item 1, so go ahead there, Andrew.
Mary Benton,
Yes.
Albert Brown. Here. Gordon Fry. Charles Jennings.
Here.
Carl
Yes.
Mills.
Here.
Mike Munson.
Here.
Andy Paton. Here. Dr. Scott Rogers.
Yes, here.
Brian Wells. Here.
All right. And at this time, we'll go over kind of the suggestions I know the city commission had, and we've kind of talked about with regards to the reorganization of the planning commission and the election of chair and vice chair. Not Gordon is here. That's true.
This is more formality than anything.
Mhm.
Dr. Scott is definitely capable of doing it again. So that part of it is the formality. However, we do need a vice chair. We do not have one currently. That used to be Rick. He's no longer on the planning commission.
Let's bring him back.
What? Not vice mayor.
No, I said let's bring him back. Sorry. No more.
Yeah, he wasn't interested.
So do we need to nominate him? I nominate Scotty.
For president, who second it? Somebody second?
Chairman of the board.
I nominate Andrew
Commissioner.
Paton as vice chairman.
Second
Too late, Andrew.
Any more discussion on the elections here for the planning commission? This has nothing to do with the board of zoning appeals. So, if not, I will, I guess what are we gonna do, roll call vote, or how do you wanna do it? Just aye, all right, all those in favor of electing Dr. Scott Roger, myself, and as chair, and Andrew Paton as vice chair, say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, thank you, guys. So, is there anything else with regards to the planning commission?
There'll be some more after this, but I want to take care of this business first.
All right, so now we'll recess. So,
We'll need a motion to formally do that.
So moved.
board made a motion to recess the planning commission and convene the board of zoning appeals. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, all those in favor? Aye. All right, so now, we switch up here. How do you want to do that, Josh?
Brian, I
Just-
can leave for a little bit.
Plenty of chairs.
Some of this is kind of clunky, but that's,
We're working it.
we're trying to find the best way to
Okay,
do this.
these are two non-residents.
No, the two non, so they have a few minutes before we can, yeah.
We're coming back in.
So, do we need to switch up and have Mary sit here? Is it, I mean, how do you want it?
That's gonna be an item 2.
All right,
So
so,
we'll have to elect chair and vice chair for them too. So you can do whatever, you can rearrange if you want to, but I would just
stay.
wait.
All right,
Or-
and I will let
Sure.
Mary take over for now for the board of zoning appeals, and she's still somewhat
Should
That's
we,
fine.
chair, yeah.
do we need to convene zoning appeals?
You just did with that motion.
Yeah.
Okay, so we,
We are now opening it with the board of zoning
Okay.
appeals.
so our close and open are one and the same.
Mhm.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, we don't need to open it up again, no.
Okay.
Call the meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals. First thing is, have you had a chance to read our minutes of our last meeting? And if so, do I hear a motion to approve or disapprove?
Sometimes I do.
I would add, that normally, we'll just combine these minutes together. We'll do them all at the same time.
All right,
This time, I'm doing it separate because this is wrapping up the final board of zoning appeals.
all right, sounds good.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Recap of recent actions by the Board of Zoning Appeals. Josh?
Sure, I'm gonna kinda do the same thing. The Board of Zoning Appeals didn't meet nearly as often as the Planning Commission, had a lot less activity. Going back to October of 2015 was when Family Dollar requested a sign variance. They wanted, now, this was before we made the changes to the regulations, so they had to adhere to the old regulations. They wanted more signs than was allowed per the regulation, and they wanted some larger signs. The Board of Zoning Appeals compromised and kind of split the baby in half, so to speak. Gave them part of what they asked for, and of course, those are all in place today. And then in March of this year, there was a lot split that came before them. The lot split wouldn't meet the regulations. The lot split, what would result from it was too small. It didn't meet the minimum lot size, and they also wouldn't meet the required rear yard setback. So the Board of Zoning Appeals granted the variance. Wasn't unanimous, but it did pass. So they were allowed to do that lot split. So that brings us to today, for them too. Yeah, in fact, Family Dollar also had one in the previous April. They had another variance. That was more than a year ago. So that's all I have for that.
Okay. Reorganization of Board of Zoning Appeals, election of a chair and vice chair.
Of course, we're using Mary as our acting chair. There's nothing saying that she can't continue in that role.
Did we have a vice?
No, I think you were the vice.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go ahead and do the same two people, that is just fine.
Madam Chair, I would make a motion that we continue status quo.
Okay,
Chair.
I'll second that.
okay, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
And I would add, there's nothing saying that had to be different people, but staff just feels that it's best if we do have separate chairs and vice chairs for the two different boards, just
I agree.
makes it easier.
Now do I hear a motion to adjourn the Board of Zoning Appeals and reconvene the Planning Commission?
So move, Madam Chair.
Second.
Okay, motion's moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor of the motion, or reconvene, I'm sorry. Adjourn and reconvene. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Carried.
All right, now I gotta get the other two back in here.
Normally,
It would end,
if there's no Board of Zoning Appeals action, we won't even do that.
all right.
Okay,
We need to go through the actual motions of it anyways. Now we've done it once.
Sounds good. Thanks, that was easy and painless, and I like that.
It gets a little more complicated for the rest of the planning commission. Just
Was
to
it-
warn you.
Was the beer still cold?
Okay, we're now on action item 10, the KOMA and KORA update.
Okay, one side of the sheet is for the Kansas Open Meetings Act, the other side is for the Kansas Open Records Act. So I'll just briefly go through these, and then if you have any questions, just holler at me. For those of you who were at the Planning Commission meeting earlier this year when I presented on the COMA, nothing has really changed with this sheet, other than I felt the need to highlight the recent incident at Cali College and remind you that we cannot have secret votes in a public meeting. So if there was any confusion about that point, I just wanted to put that to rest. All votes must be public and attributable to the person voting. But as you may or may not know, the Open Meetings Act requires all meetings of these bodies as one body to be public, to be notified to the public that have requested notification, which staff take care of. And of course, you meet at a regular time generally. But when we have a special meeting, as we are today, we give them special notice as well. And this is important for the transparency of the business being conducted so that the public has trust in what we're doing. For the Planning Commission, which has 9 members, a quorum will be 5. So if 5 of you are together, that's a meeting. If 4 of you are together discussing Planning Commission business, that would not technically be a meeting, but I don't advise doing it. It's just not good for appearance's sake. One-on-one conversations, or maybe even 3 of you talking about something is not really horrible, but in general, staff's advice is always, if you want to discuss the business before the board, let's find time to have a meeting. That's just the best way to handle it. Certainly, you can ask staff questions, and we can interact back and forth, but that is the quorum for the Planning Commission. For the Board of Zoning Appeals, which has only 7 members, the quorum would only be 4. And so 3 could also, in that instance, not constitute a majority, or therefore not a meeting. For those who don't know, meetings do not have to be in-person gatherings. The statutes and the case law have found that a meeting can be held by telephone. It can be held through email communication, which is known as a serial meeting. So do be careful of the ways that you communicate. That's why staff will always, basically we email ourselves and we blind carbon copy all the members of the board so that you cannot accidentally reply all, which would inadvertently trigger a serial meeting. We're having lots more issues now in the modern era with Facebook, text messaging. There's all kinds of ways that people can get around this if they want to, which I'm going to get into on the back side of the sheet. But just stay away from that stuff. Like I said, if there is business that needs to be discussed, this is the best forum for it. Any questions about the Open Meetings Act? Pretty basic.
Mr. Chair, I address it to you. You might address it to staff. But Mr. Lawson discussed the distinct differences between quorums for the 2 boards. But since one board is a subset of the other, I think that, he did say 3 is probably good, but I think it is best for us, whether we legally define it as that or not, to consider in our minds that a quorum is 4 and not 5. Because of the fact that we only exclude the 2 jurisdictional members of this board for the planning, for this Board of Zoning Appeals. So we could be thinking 5 and have 4 of us, but if 4 of us participate in zoning appeals, then we have still compromised open meetings.
I would agree with that, and
So-
especially given the concerns that were raised recently at the City Commission meeting about any conflict of interest between the boards or any of that type. I think it's just best to avoid those kinds of discussions. I mean, what actually constitutes Planning Commission business or Board of Zoning Appeals business, that's a pretty narrow line, to be honest. So, Josh and I discussed if something comes up before a meeting, we can always call a special meeting. If it's a specific question that we can research, we can put the answer back to the group if needed. So there are avenues around it for fact-finding.
Or these 2 guys could invite us out in the country.
Any other questions on coma? Not a lot has changed there. I just like to refresh everyone who maybe hasn't been exposed. And I don't even know if we discussed it at a Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. I think they met since we created these sheets. So, good for you 2 at least. Open records. This is a little new. The Open Records Act generally is not something that's going to concern appointed or officials, but the new changes in the laws could potentially have an impact if you're not careful. But generally, the Open Records Act is the fact that we maintain open records. Public has a right to see and inspect those by making a request, and if we maintain the record and still have it in existence, we need to produce that.
Up to today, it would have been pretty much just the minutes.
Yeah. Now, where this gets tricky is it's always been understood that staff emails are public records that can be requested because that's an email system funded by the public. But as of July 1, the Kansas legislature has expanded the definition to include any form of communication, private or public, that concerns the public business of staff, elected officials, appointed officials. We're really not even sure how far ranging this is because there just hasn't been any case law on it since it's come into effect. But we want to play it safe. So basically, you know, in the past, if we sent a public email through our system to you, that was trackable through our city servers, and it still is. But if you, Dr. Rogers, communicates with Mr. Paton about something, that could potentially also be an open record. Even though you didn't have a quorum, you didn't have a meeting, that actual email could be something that someone requests and we have to produce if they know it exists. It's really tricky because how do they even know? But what we tend to get are blanket requests from media, just wanting any and all emails concerning this issue. So be aware of that. Again, I think it's best to avoid the email communications in general between members. If you do have to discuss something with someone, the easiest way would be in person or potentially by phone. But emails, Facebook, text messages, apparently even possibly voicemail recordings could be something we would have to try to produce under this. Where it gets confusing is there's no requirement that you maintain the records, which we have to observe with public records that we maintain. So you could always delete the stuff, and then if somebody requests it, we say, sorry, we can't produce the record. I'm not advising you to do that, but this is a whole new area. Frankly, it's got Freedom of Information officers such as myself a little worried, and I'm sure city attorneys are the same way. And we really don't know how this is going to play out. This was all in response to the budget director for the governor using a private email account to communicate aspects of the budget to lobbyists and think tanks before it was even made public. So I understand why they were trying to close a loophole, but the way they wrote the law is very liberally open to interpretation, and we just don't know how that's going to play out. So for the time being, we're just basically advising do not use email to communicate with other board members. If you need to talk to them, actually talk to them. And then there is no record. But in general, as we've said, it's best to just avoid the communication on public business if you can, unless it's in a meeting setting.
And we know that there's several of you that are friends with each other and might be emailing private events.
Yeah, it has to be something that's the business of this board. If you email each other about a fishing trip, that's not a public record. And again, it's real nebulous because who's inspecting this stuff? So, you know, it's just something I'm trying to bring to everyone's attention as we go through this. But hopefully it won't be a problem. I don't foresee that it will. I don't think we have a lot of issues with this, but it is just something to keep in mind. Any questions on the record stuff? I'll step down. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Andrew. Josh, you're back up. Regulation amendments work session with regards to the zoning.
We'll spend a little more time on this item. From time to time, of course, we have to go through regulations just to see if there's anything to be updated. The key thing that the only reason I really am jumping right now to try to do some more is state of Maine has passed a statute that said that cities cannot regulate telecommunication towers as we have in the past. So we have to step back a little bit and make them a little more relaxed. So in your packet, I have included Article 23 with some markup stuff on it, all the different things that we have to change. Most of this is just that. It's stuff that we have to change to be compliant with the state statute. So there's
Is there anything that we've done in here outside of what we have to do to comply with the state?
I don't know that I have anything. There'll probably be some, like when we have a public hearing, there may be some others, like proofreading stuff that'll happen, so we may catch some little things like that. But primarily, we're talking about stuff that's required by statute. We can't require proof that a specific location is reasonably necessary. We can't regulate setbacks for towers any differently than any other structure. We can't enforce what's called co-location. If you're not familiar with what that is, that's more than one provider using the same tower. We can't force them to do that. We cannot require, okay, yeah, same thing. We can't require them to accommodate that. We also can't, I think I missed that last point. we can't require them to do, a study that shows that they have researched the area to see if other co-location opportunities are possible, instead of building a new tower. They are still supposed to do it, but there's no set area. I mean, if they went 10 foot from the tower and did a study to see if there's any other towers in the area, they've met the intent. So basically, we can't require them to do a study like that, which could potentially mean the chance that we'll have more towers going up. Just the nature of the industry. The industry pushed this through lobbies and stuff. Basically, is where this came from. And probably the most important thing is before we had a provision that said that permits would only be good for 5 years. Now they have to be good for at least 10. So before they have to come back before the planning commission for a new conditional use permit. Basically, that's how this works. We don't have any of the current towers under this process because they were all already in place before we adopted these new regulations back in 2014. They're all older. However, there is a provision at the end of it that I haven't enforced up to today. And that's that the current towers are supposed to carry liability insurance. So in the regulations, we changed the date to January of 2017 so that we can redo that. But so that's probably the only other real change that I made personally, is just so that we're fully compliant. I don't really wanna go back and say, hey, you need to do this insurance, and you should have had it back in 2014. So I just updated that date. I don't know that there's really anything else for telecommunication towers. I mean, there's lots of other edits in there, but I think I've covered, well, talked about most of these things. There's a few cases when we had to remove a section in entirety because it just doesn't comply. And all I did was just say reserve, so I had to renumber them all. And then there was a provision in there that said that every time it changes hands, whether they sell it or they get a new lessee, they're supposed to notify the city. And supposed to update all their insurance and all that kind of stuff. That's almost impossible to do that. These companies change hands all the time. And for the most part, that doesn't affect anything. They still have to comply with whatever the regulations of the permit were as the previous owner or the previous lessee. So that's been stricken in my draft anyway. Before I go on, was there any questions for specific to this section?
I understand you say they didn't have to let other people hook on their tower,
Yes, that's correct.
so there's a possibility of a whole lot more towers coming in if they get a little
Yeah,
picky.
that would be the potential result of this. Of course, here, like I said, we haven't had any applications since these have been adopted, and it's almost 3 years, or 2 years. So it's not common. Most of the time, they actually want them outside the city limits anyways. But we wanted this regulations in here to protect us from having towers all over the place inside the city. So, yes.
Well, there used to be something on like a fall zone. Does that still apply?
I mean, they'll still have that setback that's at least equal to, I think it's equal to the height of the tower plus 50 feet or something like that. I think that's still legal. We can still do that. But we couldn't make it like 500 feet further.
Well, no, but you're talking about liability insurance. They don't want to have to buy somebody's house either.
And see, that's part of why they have the liability insurance too, in case it did fall over and, I guess, bounced further than that.
Wind,
There's not very many, or
Violent
I suppose wind could blow it further.
violent wind.
There's not very many good sites in this city.
I mean, a lot of these towers, these regulations are no longer, I mean, they're state, right? we have no, I mean, other than some dates and some minor things here and there, this is basically just,
And the FCC, of course, too.
so yeah, so we can't,
And we can't tell the state or the FCC
yeah.
what to do.
We're gonna make it more strict than what they,
Yeah, that's all we're really doing is we're.
following the law.
Yeah. But
I don't, I mean,
could you just restate that, what you're saying about, transfer of ownership of the towers? We don't wanna track that?
we can't.
It's almost impossible to track it.
Yes.
And they can-
One
most of our
company can buy that
conditional use
other
permits
company and
don't
just
work
keep
out.
using it, and we'll never know.
But that doesn't mean that they're not,
But,
responsible for following the same regulations.
okay.
They would
But
still
you-
have to carry the
So-
insurance.
But you didn't remove that language, did you?
Yes, the language that said that we would require them to notify us. That's one of the sections that's been removed.
Okay, do we wanna remove that? I understand you're saying it's difficult to manage or to enforce, but to not address it at all, you know, creates this whole, Commissioner Fry's talking about, you know, incurring damage as
Is
a
that talking
result
about
of
who's
them.
using it?
Just let me finish, please, let me finish, and then you can share your thoughts, okay? That turns us into an argument when I'm talking, somebody else talks, so, mine is, if we don't know, you know, I mean, I could see where someone might incur damage as a result of that tower, some defect to it, some flaw, whatever culpability they may have, and someone could simply say, you know, exonerate themselves from any exposure by saying, we didn't own it then, you know, so.
Let me clarify something on
Yeah.
that section. The way it's worded is what the problem is. It says a tower permit may not be sold, transferred, leased, or assigned by any other person without consent of the governing body.
Uh-huh.
That is basically what we want to remove. We don't want to go to the governing body so they can sell it.
So they have to, you're saying that you're not asking for a sign off by the.
That would
governing
almost be
body.
like requiring them to get a brand new conditional use permit. We feel that's unnecessary. They'd still have to notify staff, I suppose, even without this provision, because the insurance would have to change hands, there'd be a new policy pulled, that kind of stuff. So we
They
would
don't wanna
still
tie
help
up
that.
our time every time one of these corporations that owns these and leases it to the telecommunications company switches hands.
And sometimes they just change names and that's pretty
Unbelievably
complicated.
frequently.
Yeah, none of that's foreign to me, guys. What I'm saying is our duty, our fiduciary duty, is the better interest of our citizenry and not the convenience of those corporations. If it's a problem for them, it's a problem for them.
No,
If
I
it-
completely understand where you're coming from.
I wanna make
But
sure that
that's
we're.
why we have the insurance.
Right,
Liability
it's-
insurance.
Okay, well, insurance.
That's how we would fix that.
I just wanna make sure we're not simply taking a whiff at something that's gonna leave one of our citizens, you know,
Right. That's not the
shaking their
intention.
heads and saying, what do I do? It just says, deal with the insurer, not with the person that caused the problem.
Is that dealing with who owns the tower or who they have it leased to? Because I imagine ownership's pretty easy to follow. It's gotta be taxed. It's gotta be on
The
the tax
ownership of
roll.
the tower would probably be pretty easy. It's the lessee that would.
Okay, so we don't have, basically the state, the regulation's saying that we have no right to regulate that.
The
as a
lease.
city. The lease, but the ownership is.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of one and the same sometimes. It's hard to.
It can be, I just.
It can be done.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm just saying, I understand that, that language, that's a slightly different insight on it than what I understood you to say.
Well, that's why I
initially.
pulled that up when you were talking
Thank
about
you,
that.
thank you. I
Not sure it was quite that reason.
I just sat through a case, a workers' comp case where the employer actually sold the business to someone else. And of course, the new owners say, well, that's not
In that case,
That's not our problem, because
probably true.
that person never worked for us, but no one monitored that, and so you actually have somebody with a debilitating injury that's lost simply because of paper shuffle. I'd hate to see that happen to any of our citizens.
No, I completely understand where you're coming from.
That's,
But that's why I was the insurance.
so the owners is a different whole ball game than those who lease the towers. That's what, okay, thank you, that's a.
That may be one of the same or it may be not.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, all right. Somehow or another, we have some entity that we can go back to in the event that there's any,
Yes.
So are we
Any loss?
requiring a certificate of insurance from the tower owner then? Shane's, I mean, how are we proving there's insurance enforced? Just because it's in the regulations doesn't do anything for our citizens if they don't actually
that's what.
know that they have the requirement.
They would have to do that in order to keep their permit valid. If their permit lapsed, then quite frankly, the city could sue to have them take
So
care of
you
that.
get updated certificates every year on this?
That's what we would be doing.
Okay, that's,
We currently don't have that, but that's what we would be doing, especially for new towers.
Okay, so that's, okay, so staff's gonna manage that, separate from a governing body action?
Correct.
Cool.
That's, yes.
we finally figured out.
Yes.
That we're on, yeah, we're trying, that's what I was just,
Yes.
okay, I wanted
It
to be
still
clear on what
happen
we were doing, okay.
regularly If
Okay.
we do everything right, issues
Okay.
still happen, just won't come before you, won't come before the city
So
commission.
if it falls through a crack with you, then you're culpable, is what you're
Did
saying.
I just say something that led him to say that? What is wrong with me?
Okay,
Alright.
all right.
It's Josh's fault. Got it.
Make that note.
Yeah, that's
Put
what
that
I
in
was
the
trying to get
minutes.
to. Thank you for you guys for your patience, but I thought that was
Oh, that was a good
important to
point.
kind of,
No, actually, I don't mind that. That's a good point. Beyond where's the rest of my notes? That's weird.
So do we need to make a motion to,
Well, I got a couple more things I want
Alright.
to bring up real quick.
if I knew that I would have skipped that.
And this won't necessarily be something we have to address today or not. I just want to talk about it to let you know what's going on. There's been a number of discussions recently regarding political signage. Part of the problem concerns the placement of political signs on the right of way. There's a statute right now, again, the state's messing with our regulations. They passed a statute, I think it was in 2015,
This is
in that session there.
this
It
is
said
the
that we can't regulate signs that are on the public right of way. The problem we have is we're not supposed to regulate signs based on content. But the state has told us that we are supposed to regulate political signs differently than other signs. I don't know how to deal with that. Even talking with the city attorney, she's not even sure how to reconcile that. Right now, the rest of our provisions that talks about they're not supposed to be there 45 days before or 2 days after an election, we're actually enforcing that right now. I'm not aware of any political signs in the city limit they're at right now. They've all complied with that, all the current candidates. They know that about the end of September, they can put them back out as long as they're compliant. The size thing isn't changing either, but what we're not regulating is the ones that are placed in right of way. We started to do that, and the city attorney stopped us, said don't do that. So right now, that's one of the considerations is pulling it out. The other thing that did kind of come up though is the size. There was some issues from some candidates about how we allow signs. The only place that you can put more than 4 square foot is an industrial property and countryside property, which we don't have. We don't actually have any of that in the city limits. And I think it's an industrial and ag are the other two. So most of the city, you can only put 4 square foot signs. That's worked pretty well. I mean, we've been able to enforce it. In the primary election cycle, we had several of them that were taken down, and they just found a place in the county where they put the sign anyways. So I'm not suggesting we change anything, but I did want to ask what your guys' opinion on it was. Anybody have any concerns with us being that strict?
You're talking about the political signs being 4 square feet.
Well, actually, it's supposed to be any sign, which is almost impossible to keep track of. For the purposes of this discussion, we're basically talking about political signs.
I think you'd wanna keep them small so you don't have everybody plastering big 4 bay sheets of plywood all over.
And that's the other reason I say that is because those are the only signs we have a lot of problems with. businesses don't typically put 4x8 signs on residential property. I mean, like contractors, they don't put that big of a sign up. They
So
put the little bitty sign.
The political time will let them move it closer to the street, but we're gonna, because that's in the statute, but we can still regulate the size.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I like that idea.
And also, and that's basically how it's written right now.
So I can put my garage sale sign closer to the street during the political season, since we can't regulate content.
Technically, that is true.
Yeah.
Alright,
Know when to have a garage sale.
got it?
But you're still not supposed to put it on utility poles or street signs. We can't regulate that. Again,
I mean, yeah.
you've seen a garage sale signs, how
I
possible.
don't know.
You make the politicians pick up their signs, why don't we make these garage sale people pick up their signs?
Uh-oh.
Their signs
I
out
think
in
this
my
comes up about
neighborhood-
once a year with us, but yeah, I agree.
Their signs out
But
in my
it's-
neighborhood, they've been up there for 2 and 3 weeks.
Just keep showing up at their house Saturday morning,
Yeah.
knock on their door.
Hey, where's
Well,
the
I
garage
probably
sale?
ought to pick a sign up and throw it in their front yard,
There
but,
you go.
Got any deals?
No, I
how
recognize
picky
that.
do you wanna get?
I mean, it all comes down to enforcing.
It is, right. Yeah, and that's a staffing demand also.
And it's almost
poor
impossible
use
to
of
keep
time.
up with
Yeah.
those, because I'm not gonna drive up and down every street every
I'll
So-
call you.
day. I'm not even
where
gonna do that
they're
every
at.
week.
I would say that would be a complaint driven.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's usually what I do. So maybe to answer your question a little better, is we deal with complaint driven business.
I think that's fine on some.
I
This
think-
is the one where you're growing, Mr. Munson, but, sidebar, isn't that interesting that a candidate for elected office would, not be concerned about a conflict of interest about sign placement? You'd think she would have been quiet in that,
We,
or that person would have been quiet on that,
yeah, I understand what you're saying,
but,
however,
she had,
still a city attorney.
their opponent had too many signs out, you know, okay. See, now you're supposed to say stop it.
However, she complied with everything too.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't even think she really had anything right away.
So, I think, Mr. Chair, I don't know if, we're not asking, I think the consensus of this board is that, staff
Leave it
has
as it is.
got a really good plan and work, and we just
Why-
need to.
Forward.
They don't really
My
change
thought was,
anything.
why change it again
Yep.
for another
Yeah.
election? This
I
is,
just wanted to
people
bring
will
it
start
up because
realizing
we're
it.
in the midst.
Yep,
That's
well,
cycle.
they can come and complain to us,
If you
I
need more
guess.
work, we can come up with
Oh.
something. We can come up with some recommendations.
So I say we leave that. I mean, that's I agree with what Mike said it.
Yeah.
And there's
Very
just one minor little point, and I don't even think we're gonna do much with it, but it's come up before, and that's fencing. We don't have anything that says they have to be set back from a side property line. But occasionally we have issues with somebody putting a fence right on the property line, and the neighbor being upset with it. We used to have a provision in the previous regulations that required you to have a affidavit from the property owner next to you.
To be on the
Yep,
line.
it's okay. We took that out and we did the zoning regulations. And so now, sometimes we have issues with it. It's not a common thing. And the problem with the requiring a strip is if both property owners decided that they wanted to put up a fence, they could. If we did like a 1 foot setback, now we have a narrow little tiny 2 foot strip.
Who's
between
gonna
two
mow
fences.
and weed that?
So that's why I'm not pushing that, I just
Neighborhood now.
thought I would bring it up.
I think the affidavit sounds like a good idea to put back in or look into if we do anything.
The problem with that, we took it out because of the legalities of it. The problem is,
Yeah.
if Mr. Neighbor doesn't like his neighbor very much, he can just withhold the permission without just cause. There's no way to,
You should put it back 1 inch then.
yeah. What I usually do is I just say, hey, if you're gonna put up a privacy fence, consider doing it anyways, consider putting it back up there.
The problem is, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was reading this earlier and it caught my eye, and I got to thinking on this. And if you have any type of separation on a fence, you're gonna have weeds and these, trumpet vines and everything else.
Yep.
And why I just brought this up is I just secure the property back that I was selling on contract. Court, I had to go to court for it, but what I want to emphasize is that it had a fence there. And of course, you got your telephone poles and your, Cox poles and everything. That trumpet line, they'd let it go, and it overgrown everything. And it was all the way up to the pole, or the cross member on the, Cox line there. And when I started turning that out and pulling that out, underneath, I found two chest of drawers that were demolished, land there, that were hidden by these. If you have a separation between these two property owners, you're gonna have all kinds of stuff like this growing up. One's gonna say, that's your problem, the other one's gonna say, that's your problem. To me, gentlemen, this should be a civil matter taken to court if they disagree. That fence should be on the property line totally. If they can't agree, they need to take it to court. Maybe the court will say, okay, put it down the property line and both of you pay part of it. But to have a separation, I'm completely against it.
That's kind of how we've addressed it currently, is just say, well, that's a civil dispute between neighbors.
And one other point I wanna make is, if you do this and have the separation, you're gonna make more work for our city employees, and we've had to cut down anyway now on them. Code enforcement, people that go out and cut these weeds and stuff, pick up the branches off the street and stuff like that. Don't put an added burden on them. Let's just leave this to the court and have no separation whatsoever.
Mr.
Thanks, I agree.
Okay, Mr. Chair, well, the only thing that if I were going to say, we might wanna explore, what maybe best practices in other communities would be under the banner of whose fence is it anyway? You know, if a fence that sits on a property line when, what's his name?
Albert.
Huh?
Albert.
When Albert builds a fence on on our adjoining property line, or abutting properties, and I'm living next door, whether I like it or not, he's built a fence. When Albert sells his property, or I sell my property, or Albert and I both sell our property, then all of a sudden you have a whose fence is it, and it really doesn't matter until you have a strong wind that comes and blows down a fence.
Yeah,
And then
who's
who
gonna
puts
fix
it back up, who's gonna, you know, that type of thing, whose fence is it anyway?
However, in that case, a foot isn't gonna help.
Yeah, and I didn't know,
Well, it would.
I didn't know we'd go into a foot, I thought we were 2 feet off either side to create that passage between. I
We
thought
don't
it
have
was-
anything.
Okay.
I did check with some other cities. Most of them don't have anything different than what we have. There was one, I think it was Lansing. They basically did the same thing that we did before. They required you to get permission from the property owner.
Right.
We've already established that that didn't work very well. So, I had several cases
Let them deal with it.
where,
I thought
they
we
couldn't
were
get the
2 feet off.
property owner's consent. We had some of those. It was just, and why? Well, I don't think
Yeah.
the wind will blow through as well, or
Usually you don't like
I
your
don't
neighbor
know.
anyway, that's why you're
It's-
putting the fence up.
Yeah.
Right,
So-
right.
You don't like your neighbor,
But-
but you wanna have it.
But,
Basically, you did exactly what I wanted you to do, just talk about it for a minute. I'm not suggesting we change anything.
okay.
Do we need to make any motions to approve the Article 23 changes? I mean, are those,
For set a hearing.
or for, I guess, or set a hearing for all that? I mean,
That's
is that-
what I would propose you just
Yeah,
said.
thanks, Marcus.
Or we just send these to the city commission, or?
I think we have to do a hearing first.
Yes, it would after that.
Yeah, we have to do a hearing first, let people know we're having a vote on
I
this.
move we have a hearing on, the proposed changes to Article 23.
You have a date proposed for
Yep.
that?
At-
You want the next meeting?
The regular
It'd be
schedule.
probably at the October meeting, because the next meeting is too quick,
Okay.
All right.
because we're having this meeting too late.
Is that your motion?
Yes.
Second.
October.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor of having a hearing for the zoning regulation amendments in October, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? At this time, do we have future meetings, do we have anything planned in September? Anything come up yet?
No, there's no meetings. There's nothing on the agenda for September. We had one that was gonna happen, but it was from the police department, actually. They were wanting to put up a fence that was taller than was allowed to meet the regulations. But the chief looked through the regulations again and decided, oh, we can meet the regulations.
I'll bring him over. Bring him over.
So he's not going to challenge. He's not gonna censor it.
Or are they trying to hide?
But other than that, for the future meetings, I just wanted to check to make sure this time, because we're combining these boards together, they met at different times, different days. Does the second Tuesday at 5:30 still work?
Works for me.
With schedule?
Yep.
The board of zoning appeals was the second Monday at 5. I like 5:30 better, to be honest with you. It gives me a little more time to
I would,
get situated and come down here. The 5 o'clock meetings were sometimes a challenge.
yeah, I agree.
Do we need to make a motion for
To
that?
the chair, to the
Mary?
BZA chair,
Excuse me?
do you have a thought on that? You have any
I'm
concern?
fine. I have a meeting the first Monday and I have one, the third Monday and the first Tuesday. Is the
So-
city county.
Second Tuesday should be just fine.
So, the second will be fine.
I just say we,
Monday meeting, so that's fine.
I anticipated that. I just thought I would bring that up in case
I just say we
anybody
keep it
wanted to
as
change
they
before we
are,
come to it.
so I don't think we need a motion or anything like that, so.
We won't change anything.
Yeah, so,
That's the
recommend a
second Tuesday.
representative to the Historic Preservation Board.
This is a new thing that we're trying to do across all boards, is we're trying to get recommendations from different boards for appointees. This one's a little bit different. Used to be, we had a provision in the Historic Preservation Board regulations that a planning commissioner was supposed to be on the board. But we removed that along with some other requirements that require them to be from other entities around town. But staff kind of feels that it's still good to have a planning commissioner on there because of the comprehensive plan. Historic preservation is part of the comprehensive plan. That being said, Gordon has been on that board for a number of years and has done a fine job. I would still recommend that he would be reappointed. His term expires in September. So,
And we'd appoint him as a member of our board to serve on their board?
it's just purely a recommendation.
Okay.
is
Maybe a
all.
full voting member,
This
just like
is
any other
nothing but
member on the
formality.
board? Okay.
And he would be a full voting member, correct, on the
Yeah.
historic, yep.
Yeah,
And he is today.
Okay.
So unless Gordon doesn't want to do it.
yeah, is that what you want, Gordon?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, will of the chair.
Recommend, appointing Gordon Fry to Historic Preservation Board. Motion, I will make that motion.
Second.
Mary seconds. All those in favor of appointing Gordon to the Historic Preservation Board, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
And the
All right.
rest of those members, they will just recommend appointees to that board as well.
Sounds good. Josh, or anyone else? Charles, anyone have any other items or any concerns, questions?
That's funny that you spelled out Charles specifically.
Well, I meant either Charles. I was looking at Charles Tweedy when I said that. I meant someone.
Charles
So,
usually has a closing
that-
remark
but yes,
for us,
do you?
so-
Oh, I had a good answer.
No. So, if not, I entertain a motion